Good morning and welcome to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder and this is BRN AM for Wednesday, September 4th, 2019. Our headline today, student loan debt is transforming the American family. It's back to school for many students at colleges and universities this week. And as many of you know, student loan debt has skyrocketed in the United States. It's been estimated that 45 million people in the United States hold educational debt totaling roughly $1.5 trillion. That's more than what Americans owe on their credit cards and auto loans combined. Some fear that this could be the next big bubble to burst. And joining me now to discuss, Rick Seltzer. He's a journalist with Inside Higher Education. Hey, Rick, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to hear your voice. How's Baltimore treating you?
Beautiful. We're starting to get a little cooler. All that humidity's dropped out, so we're loving it now.
And we're almost on football season. I know you're a huge Eagles fan. I hope you guys do really well. As a Ravens fan, it's your transition. We're hoping we're going to do well as well. So, as I said at the top of the hour, a lot of news going out of higher education. You had some of these scandals that were going on. A lot of questions about funding as it relates to higher education. What's top of mind for you and the folks at higher education this week?
So this week we actually just had some pretty significant news coming out of the trade organization that handles college admissions counseling. They've been under investigation by the Department of Justice for almost 2 years now, dating back to 2017. And it looks like they're trying to reach an agreement that would end the investigation, but have them striking some things from their codes of conduct and codes of ethics that have been pretty important restrictions on when colleges and universities can recruit students, which students they can recruit that maybe even are already committed to or enrolling in other colleges and universities. So we're looking at the DOJ pushing back and pushing to eliminate some restrictions on the recruitment market that could really shake the whole field up.
So what do you think is the impact here? I mean, we've talked in the past on this show with you about student loan debt. We've talked about some of these scandals that have occurred. What's going to be the impact? Will this impact tuition? Will it bring tuition costs down? Many of our viewers out there are saving for either theirs or their child's tuition to go to college.
Sure. So bear with me. I'm going to read off 3 of the rules they're looking to strike.
Okay.
A little bit in the weeds, but there's a reason for it. So they're looking to strike rules that were barring incentives for enrolling under early decision. So if you have a student who knows they want to go to NYU, Columbia, another really prestigious institution, and they want to make the commitment, if I get in, I'll go. Colleges can now offer financial aid or other incentives, potentially, if this gets approved. It isn't approved yet, but could potentially offer additional incentives for students like that. That's a relatively small subset of the population. There are also rules that would be going away around that restricted colleges from recruiting students who committed to another college. Potentially rules around that May 1st deadline that you always see. A lot of times when you get a college financial aid offer, you have to accept by May 1st, and then you're kind of locked in. Although there's always been a little wiggle room there, that's likely going to be going away, it looks like. And then the other big one is there was a rule preventing colleges from soliciting transfer applications from their previous applicant pools. So the way I read that, and I haven't vetted this with any lawyers yet because it's pretty hot off the printer up by my desk, but the way I read that, if I apply to Georgetown and another DC area college, I don't get into Georgetown, but I go to the other DC area college, and then Georgetown, for whatever reason, has some spots open up for their sophomore year. I go to college my freshman year. In my sophomore year, Georgetown can come knocking and say, hey, you want to transfer to us? That's a pretty significant change. Before, I, the student, would have had to initiate that transfer.
Wow, so they're really turning it into, it feels to me almost like an NCAA college recruitment. I mean, these schools are really struggling, and some of them financially. We've got very exhaustive, very high tuitions, but it seems to put into play some real competitive forces here. Do you think that ultimately that could drive costs of tuition down, or do you think, certainly I think the incentives would help people mitigate some of the costs of tuition, but do you think ultimately some of these rule changes might drive costs of tuition down?
I think it has the potential to do that. Again, depending how the market reacts, it has the potential to drive down costs, at least for some students. If you're an attractive student, one that fits into whatever characteristic a college wants to have on its campus, whether that's test scores or a polo player or whatever it might be, they potentially could be bidding for you with financial aid packages much later into the season. Or into the year. Season, see, I'm slipping into that NCAA terminology myself.
Yeah.
But it absolutely could drive down college prices for those students.
Well, I'm sure that would certainly be a relief. You know, market force is obviously important to creating competition. Competition definitely equalizes prices. Rick, thanks so much for joining us. It sounds like this is going to be a hot topic. We'll come back to you if there's any follow-up, and would love to chat with you more about how we can bring that cost of tuition down. You have a great weekend, and you know what? Enjoy the Eagles next week on playing on Sunday.
Sounds good. I'll look forward to being back. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick, for your analysis. We're certainly going to be watching this one and the impact to future tuition costs in the United States. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about children with special needs and the impact to families' financials. Kimberly Potter of the Core Behavioral Group will be right here to join us, right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. In 2018, over 7 million children received special education services in the United States. That's over 14% of public school students. Well, there's certainly a lot for families and friends of families to think about for these children. And joining me now to discuss, Kimberly Potter. She's the Chief Clinical Officer with the Core Behavioral Group. Welcome, Kim, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
There are obviously many American families that are impacted by these challenges of having children with special needs. How do you and the folks at Core Behavioral see this issue?
At the Core Behavioral, we seek to treat the whole child, but as it relates to especially parents who have just received that diagnosis, it can be very shocking. It's a very big change of what you think your outlook is. There are a lot of different factors. There's kind of the emotional, there's the pragmatic, and there's definitely the financial aspect as well. With a lot of these families, their first thought might be, this child needs all this treatment. How am I going to pay for it? Or even further than that, will this child then need guardianship? Is this a child that will need more help throughout their life? And there are many other things that people will think about with this, but those are the biggest ones we see at Core Behavioral.
In terms of finances, what are some of the things that these families and friends of families are challenged by?
I think some of the biggest is cost of treatment, And then further down the road, potential cost of guardianship or cost of care in later life. Fortunately, there have been changes in the laws over the past 15 years, combined with how social services has changed, that can be a huge help. First and foremost, you have autism laws or mandates in all 50 states now, which is huge. The first one enacted in Indiana in 2002, and they've just been steamrolling ever since. What that means is that autism services, whether it's ABA, which is kind of the gold standard, or speech, or OT, PT, education, whatever it is, it has to be covered if it's a medical based, so behavioral, speech, PT, etc., has to be covered by insurance, provided it's not a federally self-funded plan. Furthermore, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, repealed some of the limits that were in these laws, such as an age limit, an hour limit, or a spending cap, which further allowed these mandates to truly fund a lot of therapy for these children and now for adults.
Kim, it seems that this diagnosis has come up more recently. Would you consider to be a very recent and current trend?
Diagnosis does tend to come on trends. If you look in the 80s, there was definitely an uptick in diagnosis of attention deficit. In the 90s, you definitely saw an uptick in nonverbal learning disability. And this is multifold. Sometimes you are looking at different diagnoses for different treatments. Other times it's further awareness and a further availability of diagnosing services. There are 10 times the number of clinicians today than there were even 10, 12 years ago. So just more availability, more accessibility, but also as these diagnoses, their strict definition changes. The biggest diagnosis guide is the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's this giant book with every diagnosis for psychology, developmental that you can have. And every 20 years, they change it. And so what counted as attention deficit in some instances, especially as relates to social skills or attending, may now be more in autism or Asperger's, which first showed up in 1994, is now under the autism umbrella.
Kim, it seems that insurance companies, both federal and state governments, have evolved to assist families. Is that true? And how do you at Core Behavioral see it?
Absolutely. They will differ from state to state, but some states you can get supplemental Medicaid for your child just from having one of these developmental diagnoses like autism or other diagnoses as well, like Rett syndrome. Furthermore, we can't forget that school districts have a legal and it's a federal mandate to provide a free and appropriate education. And that appropriate education may include home-based services and additional services in school or during the summer. And one of the last ones would be many states now have a catastrophic illness children's fund. New Jersey's is one of the strongest, but you see them in many states over the country. And what this does is it provides assistance with payment for services. So even if insurance is covering, you may still have that copay or other equipment you need, and that can definitely add up. And a lot of these funds will cover up to 10 to 20% of those costs, or if it occurs over 10% of your income. So it can be a great lifesaver.
Well, Kim, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll obviously have to keep our eyes peeled on this developing issue. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon. Well, thanks, Kim. That's great information for families and friends of those families with children with special needs. And well, folks, that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hope you found the information really helpful. Hey, have a topic you'd like for us to cover or someone you think that should be interviewed? Make sure you drop us a line. And don't forget, there's so much more news in today's morning poll, so you can check that out online as well. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder, and don't forget, roll with the changes.